Persuasion is a great example of social strategy versus morality because on the one hand, I'm going to be crucified upside down for teaching this kind of content, and yet at the same time, while these three techniques are highly effective and their utility goes further than just persuasion, they can really improve your social influence in a healthy, more positive fashion. In my view, everyone to even a small extent will want to change the social situation they are into their favor, whether they realize this or not. People are persuading each other all the time, just most are not very good at it. And I guess a lot of this comes down to the lack of acceptance that this is what they're doing. It's a sense of conscious guilt based upon acting against conventional morality, which prevents oneself from actually developing a strategy. And since these techniques are based on what is effective, you may find it personally disputable to take advantage of them. Well, I still think it's good to build an awareness about how they work. So at the very least, if people do use similar techniques against you, you will know how to defend yourself. And in my view, they will. The use of persuasion and influence is just as relevant now, and maybe even more so, than it has been for the past centuries. And for clarification, the type of persuasion that I'm referring to is not so much about convincing someone to your ways of thinking. In this case, it's about shaping your social situations to your favor, influencing people in the direction that you choose, and ultimately currying favor with those around you. The main mistake people make when persuading is that they tend to go for more of a rational process of communication, which is a sticking point attributed to many who endeavor in social learning. They will very clearly try to reason with the person to get what they want, or even worse, just beg, like out of pure mercy. It's often a reactionary stance more than anything. The best form of persuasion in my eyes comes from tapping into the unconscious minded drives of said person. It does not come from logical reasoning. This meaning that you're indirectly accessing the needs and drives of that person you're interacting with, doing so in a way that builds trust and connection while allowing you to pull the strings of their motivation. As a counterexample, the logical way of doing it would be, say, negotiating or bartering, making a deal. This is the premise of which these three techniques are built upon. If you combine this, for example, with, say, concealing your own intentions for both protection and effectiveness, then you will become a very good persuader in a very short space of time. So before we jump in, remember that the quality of your persuasion has very little to do with the actual exchange in itself, but much more to do with setting the right context and relationship around whatever the issue is. The first technique shows this really well. A personal machination of mine is realizing just how little people are invested in what you have to say. In general conversation, people really aren't listening. They are simply too invested in their own problems to care, and they have the constant voice of the ego tickling their eardrum while they are waiting to speak themselves, as opposed to actually listening. There are counterexamples, of course, and there are people that really do care, but it's a much smaller amount than I think people realize at times. You ask why this has anything to do with persuasion? Well, I think for two big reasons. Firstly, the tool of listening is essential because to persuade or influence anyone, you need to know what makes that person tick. It helps to know more about the individual, and at the very least, you'll be able to build a stronger relationship. And second, when persuading, we take a sudden interest in the person that we're talking to, compared to what we would normally. This gap in nature causes suspicion, and therefore, the good use of subtlety is an imperative if you're going to persuade well. So how do we use conversation to persuade? Well, it's a social triptych of listening, charming, and then reorientating the focus. In our society, it's now so rare that you need to take advantage of it. Remember that showing you are is just as important as it encourages the speaker to keep on going. Take an actual interest. At the very least, it's an opportunity to learn and to gain strategic information. Then we get into charming. I think there are 3 points to make to help you charm more effectively. Firstly, it needs to be more authentic. When you give a compliment, you actually have to mean it. There's no point lying about how you like his cooked-to-fuck pair of Reeboks. People can tell inauthenticity really well, unless you live in LA. It needs to be individual. A general comment about how is pretty ineffective. It's not gonna go and grab the attention you need to draw investment. Now, don't go too weird with this, but it's always great to pick out a quality that the person probably hasn't been complimented on before. The more unique, the better. Play on insecurity rather than strength. There's absolutely no point praising someone on something they know they're good at. It's about as effective as Logan Paul working for the Samaritans. Instead, play on what they aspire to be, so you can give a sense of validation that they never really would have. Using terminology such as reorientating the focus, you kind of get the impression that I'm some incel merchant with rather sordid aspirations for attention. Even so, I think there are 2 clear points that you can avoid by changing the person's focus. Firstly, they know that you are trying to persuade them, and then secondly, that they know what your goal is and what you're after. If people feel that you're trying to persuade or influence them, they will likely lose trust in the relationship. You may even end up resentful because people don't like feeling coerced. Likewise, if people know what you want, they will take the upper hand on a massive scale, because they can afford to turn the situation into a bargaining act, knowing that they hold the keys to what you want. The best way in my eyes to avoid this issue is by consciously altering the focus of the person you're interacting with. So how do you do this? Well, if you're after a goal, purposefully state that you're after something else, and even better if it's similar, match this with your talk and behavior. Don't state that you're after nothing. It's brain-dead talk that is normally never true, and people know this. Use emotion. This is a byproduct of tapping into unconscious motives. People will often get caught up in emotions to think rationally. A similar example of this process is often referred to as falling in love. One of the most successful techniques in parenting is to make the child feel fully in control of their decisions. I quote the laws of human nature by saying that it's a human desire to feel autonomous. And so with this example, when we remove this feeling from the child and force rule upon them, the child will rebel, not particularly because they want to, but just out of sheer resentment. Making the child come to its own conclusions actually induces responsibility. When it comes to persuasion, it's best to avoid making people feel like they're being coerced. And one of the best, but also one of the most subtle ways to do this, is by conceding the frame. This is making the person feel empowered, but at your own personal expense. This does sound weak-minded, but if done in a careful manner, it can be actually very politically advantageous to do so, especially at work. This is actually much more difficult to do than you would think. People just don't like giving their sense of power away. Our egos just don't like it. So then why do this? Well, it provides that person with that feeling of autonomy that we spoke about, but in a way that you yourself have constructed. If you're generally quite forceful with your techniques and your social manner overall, then I highly recommend that you do this. It allows you to direct that person, yet at the same time they will feel that they are making decisions on their own accord. Similarly to a lot of the techniques, the rarity of being able to do so actually induces investment in the relationship, while also being a very hard technique to notice, as we said. I stress the importance of conceding in a way that is not petty. So here are some of the ways that prevent this. Don't just praise a person with affection, instead praise him with curiosity. For example, ask for advice or knowledge about a certain topic. Make it clear that they are a step ahead of you and that you want to learn from them. Ask once and never beg. An alternative way would be to concede through argument or discussion. At first, disagree with their point of view. Lightly, of course. If you've called them an absolute buttered fuck crumpet, you've already failed. Then follow with a change of mind where you move towards their own point of view. You'll be surprised with how hard your own ego makes this to do, and you'll also be surprised with how well they will receive you afterwards, because of this rare feeling of empowerment. Particularly with younger crowds where you get so many dude bros fighting for the frame, they will enjoy this rare feeling and not notice what you have actually done. It's easy to take the opinion that conceding the frame for political gain is just not worth it because it is beta orientated. But I would say that I know when I can spot a social apprentice, mostly because they are constantly battling to be the most dominant one in the room. It's try-hard 101. When done purposefully and with ease, it's a sign of confidence, and I think for this reason. Since you already have the knowledge that you can, in essence, turn it on socially, you don't have to keep justifying to yourself that you can. You don't feel insecure about others around you and their ability to out-dominate you because you've moved past that way of thinking. It no longer worries you. Overall though, this technique is a very easy one to attempt because of its subtlety and because all you're doing is really conceding the frame. Unless you're in important social situations where you may not want to do so, it's a good one to just to try out, to test your skills in this kind of area. Desire is yet another unconscious drive in which you need to be aware of all the time. Once again, it's another underutilized technique, probably because there's a strong sense that when trying to persuade, it's best to be honest and to appeal to the person's integrity. It's about being clear with your motives and asking directly, an act of personal strength. When we were young, we were rewarded to communicate in this way. Being clear in your motives and honest in your persuasion was encouraged. It was seen as the virtuous thing to do. And while these techniques may be familiar, they are never going to serve you for the means of social power and persuasion, at least in highly political situations. And I'm well aware that at times, this strategy can be advantageous. The receiver will respect the no-nonsense approach and respond well. The Benjamin Franklin idea is another example of this. The use of asking for small favors out of honesty could, through cognitive dissonance, improve your relationship with those you have asked. But look, if you're going to use honesty, it would only work well if you have built a solid foundation of healthy reputation to do this. But even after, still puts you at unnecessary risk. But for most contexts, this style of persuasion is outright terrible. I guess a lot of it comes down to the Roman ideals of honor or dignitas, which does sound like an underwhelming toothpaste, but if you can deal with the ghost of Cicero nibbling on your toes in a not very fun manner, then you're good to go. So why is it important to appeal to what the other person wants? Well, let's start by seeing what happens if you don't. Firstly, they will naturally want something back. Now, of course, the person won't admit this, they'll say, oh, it's fine, but actually, they will remember it. There's never such thing as a free lunch. They will probably not do the job or action well. If they feel they've done something for nothing, as a freebie say, they will focus on the fact that they're doing it for nothing rather than actually doing the task well. Appealing to someone's wants actually gets them invested rather than appealing to the weak rim of pure honesty, and it protects you at the same time. To do this, I would start by combining with point 1, use active listening to gauge what they want. Because unless you're trying to persuade a unit to go to a strip club, the person will have something that they are after. So overall, always present the scenario as a discussion of what you could do and avoid putting yourself in a bargaining position. This can be done so by presenting the scenario as a win-win to quell fear of taking action. As mentioned, avoid pleading like the plague. The basic requirement is keeping the conversation as a discussion. Don't be obvious by being needy, coercive, or forceful with the benefits. Don't use listing, for example. This is not in the style of a rational exchange. As I mentioned, the style does not tap into the unconscious bias that we're trying to connect with. Talk about the benefits nonchalantly. Never express encouragement and let the person invest themselves. Use embellishment if you have to and learn what appeals to that particular person. Everyone is after something different. So what are some of the advantages to using these techniques? Well, I think there are a couple. You're going to be able to induce more investment in your relationships and thus create better ones. You're going to be able to become more influential among your peers and then your social circles. It allows you to build greater loyalty. It allows for greater social protection. And ultimately, I think it allows you to get into that kind of coveted position that I think so many want to be in, which is more of a social influencer and instigator rather than someone who always seems to be reacting to social events. In my view, the best way to use these techniques is to use them in tangent, but I would also say that it's up to you how you want to use them and where you want to apply them.